Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Bruce Feiler is the author of The Search, Finding Meaningful Work in a Post-Career World. This episode is guest hosted by Julie Chavez, author of Everyone But Myself, a forthcoming Zibby Books title, and also Ask a Librarian. Bruce Feiler is the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, including Life is in the Transitions, The Secrets of Happy Families, and Council of Dads. His 3 TED Talks have been viewed more than 4 million times, and he teaches the TED course How to Master Life Transitions. His latest book, The Search, Finding Meaningful Work in a Post-Career World, is a bold new roadmap for finding meaning and purpose at work, based on insights drawn from hundreds of life stories of all vocations and backgrounds. A native of Savannah, Georgia, Bruce lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Linda Rottenberg, and their identical twin daughters. Bruce, thank you so much for being with me today. I am so happy that you're a guest on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
First of all, thank you for having me. I just want to say I'm a huge fan of Moms Don't Have Time as a dad who doesn't have time. I just think that what Zibby and you and the whole team are building is, great for moms, great for writers, great for librarians, great for booksellers, just great for the world, that when everything is going by us so quickly that we can pause and have real conversation. So I'm delighted to be back.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. And I agree with you. Zibby has built something so special in this space and continues to do so. So I'm so happy that I get to be a part of it and talk to you today. So let's dive into your book. We're talking today about The Search, Finding Meaningful Work in a Post-Career World. So I have to tell you, I got the ARC, and as soon as I got it, I went and found my husband instantly. And I said, so you're going to be reading this book after me, because this is such a timely, interesting book. I tore through it. I took so much wisdom. So I'm so excited to talk about it with you today.
Well, thank you. I just, in fact, an hour ago said that the work I've been doing, this is not the first book I've written, as you know, and I've been doing this for many years, but this work I've now been doing for 6 years of collecting and analyzing hundreds of life stories of Americans of all ages and all walks of life and all backgrounds. It led to my last book. And the first time I was on Moms Don't Have Time, Life is in the Transitions. And now this one that we're going to talk about. But what I said to someone this morning was generally speaking, over time, I would say that my work has appealed more to women than to men. And this book is appealing to women, and because I think women are at the vanguard of a lot of the change that I kept hearing in my conversations and that this book explores. But I also think it's equally men too.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of really solid information here, obviously, but also I think you do such a good job of really dismantling something that generationally I think is very much something that we haven't thought of. So I know for example, for us, both my dad and my husband's father worked for the same company for their entire careers.
Oh, really?
Yes, which even then was a bit of an anomaly. And when my husband started out, I think he had a sense that that's what he was going to do as well, and then had a workquake. And it's just so interesting to see how it's not what happens anymore. I was looking at even early in the book, you mentioned 1/3 of the workforce leaves their job every year.
That shocked me, but it shouldn't. I mean, that is kind of the new way of things. So I guess let's start here if we can. There are so many beautiful stories in this book. I was so moved by so many of the stories. Will you tell me about the process of collecting them? Because I know you talked a little bit about that for Life is in the Transitions, but I just want to hear about, as they've sat with you over time and you've researched these stories, how has that felt for you?
Well, it feels like a privilege, right? To look people in the eye. It's what you do on, in your life, in multiple areas of your life. But it's the essence of what I love most about what I do, is looking someone in the eye and saying, I'm interested in your story, and tell me your story. Let me go back a little bit in the process and talk about how I ended up in this. I mean, I, in a lot of ways, had what I think of as a traditional linear life. Like, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and I stumbled into what I wanted to do early in my life of writing. I did it for no money for a while. I had some success, and then got married and had children. And this is the fantasy that we all have. But in my 40s, my life blew up, as you know. First, I got cancer at 43 as a new dad. I had financial troubles, and then my own dad got Parkinson's and tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. And as a storyteller professionally, I didn't know how to tell this story, and I didn't want to. And when I did, what I found is that everybody's life got blown up. Though I ended up calling those, as you know, lifequakes. And so I went out and I said to my wife, like, no one knows how to tell their story anymore, and I want to do something to help. And what I did was create this thing that I now call the Life Story Project. And in the first round of interviews that I did, I sort of took everybody, right? I was like, do you know any? I would interview someone and I would say, who do you know that's had an interesting life story? And it was sort of, it kind of a little bit went viral. I put it on social media, and then I began hearing from people. And that then led to Life is in the Transitions, which turned out to arrive in the middle of the pandemic when the entire planet was in a life transition, right? So that sort of turned out to be the right idea at the right time. And within really a few weeks of that book coming out in 2020, I both felt, because for me, it's always a feeling. And then also began to imagine, like, work is the next thing to fall. Like, you already were beginning, like, people work from home was coming up, right? There was the should we be moving and remote work. And, then we had the public health crisis. And then we had everybody was working at home and the family dynamic crisis. All these things were converging at one time. And so, like the first time, I didn't really know what I was looking for. I just knew that we had to tell this work story. And I think it's worth pausing and saying, the idea of our life is a story. That was a fringe, radical idea in the 1980s in psychology, and it's entered kind of the mainstream. But for reasons that somewhat escape me, we don't really talk about it in work. Like, we don't talk about our work lives as a story that we inherited from our parents, right? These expectations and our culture and our upbringing. And that isn't an idea that's really taken hold. And that began to become the dominant. So the answer to your question is, this time I tried to be more intentional, right? So because I wanted to get out of my own bubble. So I actually made what I came to call a bingo card. I looked at the Department of Labor, like all the jobs people have. And it was, and I divided them up into 25 categories and, 25 items in 5 categories. I was like energy and maintenance, right? And public service and food and beverage and beauty and fashion. And I just wanted to make sure. So that was the first thing I did. And this time, because I already had this team of people that helps me code and analyze these stories, I sent them out, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would say, you know what? I need a doula. And I'm like, I don't want a doula from Brooklyn where I live. Like, a doula in Brooklyn is obvious.
Right.
And so then I ended up, they brought me, they would bring these people. Everybody would go, okay, go get me go get me someone who's a spy. I want somebody who opened a farm, right? And so I want somebody who works in a nuclear power plant, right? Those are, by the way, just 3 great stories. That Kelly Lively story, who works in the Idaho National Labs, started as a secretary.
Yes.
Her husband didn't want her to work. And she thought having children will help. Having children didn't help.
Didn't help.
She went back to school because she thought, I'll never get above being a secretary, is what they called them then. She became the highest ranking woman in her department, who single-handedly led driving a nuclear reactor from Idaho to Florida to ride on the space shuttle. And she's got a side job, and we're going to talk about this in this conversation. She's got a side job as what? A stand-up comedian. That's a mom who doesn't have time to read because she's running the country and cracking jokes at the same time, right? So that's the nonlinear work life. So my team would bring me people, and then we voted. Like everybody would vote, like, that's a good story, that's not a good story. And so I have to say the bar, like the standard of the stories in this book were even higher than the amazing stories in Life is in the Transitions.
Well, you can see it because reading some of these, I mean, I would get halfway through one and go, what? I mean, just out loud. I was so amazed by some of the turns these people's lives took.
Yeah, let's do Kirsten Green for a second. Like Kirsten Green, she grows up in Alabama, okay? She gets a job teaching at an HBCU criminology. She wants to be a doctor, but she switches to criminology. She's running her department at this college, and she's got a partner, and there is a family member whose teenage daughter gets pregnant. Turns out it was not consensual,
right?
The experience, and the girl decides she wants to keep the baby and says to Kirsten, "I want you in the delivery room with me." So she's a criminologist. She starts taking online classes. She becomes a doula, and immediately after helping this family member give birth, the girl says to her, "You would be great at this." Kirsten changes her academic research to look at pregnant incarcerated women and how we can lower recidivism among them. And now she's opening a birth center so that other people can have the opportunities that she's had in her life. So she's got a full-time job, and she now has this side job that gives her even more meaning. She's actually doing a main job that gives her meaning, but the side job, and that really, I think, is the thing to underline here, Julie, which is that the biggest change that's going on in work. I mean, you mentioned the fact that a third of the people, I think the stakes here are worth emphasizing.
Yes.
70% of Americans are unhappy with what they do. 75% of Americans, in a survey released 2 weeks ago, said they plan to look for new work in the next 12 months. 75%. 1 million people a week quit a job. That's not laid off. That's not fired. That's quit a job. That's a third of the workforce. And another third of the workforce is saying, I don't want to go in 5 days a week. Like, I don't want to commute, or I want to spend more time with my family, or I want to be at Little League when my son is there, or the ballet recital for my son, or my daughter is there as a ballet dad myself. So that's 100 million people, like you said with your husband at the outset of this conversation, who are sitting across from someone they love this morning, this afternoon, tonight, as they're listening to our conversation, saying, I'm unhappy with what I'm doing and I want to do something else. And here's the thing that no one's prepared to sacrifice anymore. Fewer people are searching merely for work, and more people are searching for work with meaning. And that is a trend that's been building for a while. I'm not prepared to sell myself to an organization or a company or somebody else, even a startup. Meaning is important to me. What's been missing, it turns out, and this is what sort of came to emerge from these conversations, is how do I find that meaning, which is why sort of the bulk of the search is essentially a toolkit for trying to say, I want meaningful work. I don't know. No one ever taught me. My parents told me, dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
Right.
They're like, go seek that thing that we all were taught. Well, turns out the job I want involves sitting around in sweatpants most of the day. But the point is, no one ever gave us this toolkit. And that's what I think is the thing that I discovered that I'm most passionate. I call it, 21 questions to find work you love, helping people help themselves and the people they live with find work that's suited to who they are right now. Not 2 months ago, not 2 years ago, not 20 years ago, right now.
I love the way that you explain that, because even when I was reading through the book, I read through it the first time just to get a sense of everything. But I thought, I want to go back and read these questions and fill in the blanks, because there's so much. And to your point, saying, who you were a few months ago, if the idea that we're always evolving and changing and growing, hopefully, in our lives, then the work that we do has to shift with that. And so this idea that we need more fluidity, and you speak to how it's even more fluidity than we really would assume.
I think that's right. And I think it's interesting. I got a call yesterday from the editor of Psychology Today, and she just read my book and was asking me to contribute to Psychology Today some pieces. And she used a line that echoes what you just said. She said, I think your book is about how to do the work to get the work you want.
Oh, that's perfect.
And I do think that is a very interesting formulation. But let's set the stage, right? So what are the lies that that your husband and maybe you and certainly me grew up with? I would say lie number one is you have a career. Right? The idea that you're going to follow your passion and pick something in your 21 or 22. Well, guess what? 85% of people in my survey said they did not follow their passion. They discovered it or changed it or made it along the way. So the pressure on us, I'm about to send 2 kids to college in 100 days. The chances that they're going to know their passion, passion is great, but it changes over time. So you don't have a career. Point number 2, the fluidity. The average person, you mentioned workquake, right? So what is a workquake? A workquake is a moment where you rethink or reconsider or reevaluate or sort of ask yourself, am I doing what I want to be doing? We go through 20 workquakes in the course of our lives. That's every 2.85 years. But here's the thing, and this echoes in what we've been saying. Women go through them more than men. Xers go through them more than boomers, and millennials more than Xers. Okay? By the way, and diverse workers more than non-diverse workers. So a millennial woman will go through 2/3 more workquakes in her life than her boomer parents. Okay? And this, I think, is the signature piece of data. And actually, I think it's almost like the spirit of Moms Don't Have Time, right?
Yeah.
Which is the majority of workquakes, 55%, begin outside the workplace, right? So it's not that you get laid off or you don't like your boss or you don't like the work or you have to travel and you don't want to travel because you want to be home with your family. It's because something happens in your personal life, right? With your health, right? Hello, yes. I'm raising my hand. I got diagnosed with a life-threatening cancer at 43. And I was walking the Bible and, doing all this stuff and I'm hosting TV shows and Indiana Jones. And suddenly I was on crutches for 2 years.
Right.
So that was a workquake, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a parent of identical twin daughters. That was a joyful, wonderful experience. But you know what? It was a workquake because it made us reevaluate everything we were doing, right? So the point is, it's our personal lives, it's our health, it's our family, it's between our ears. We don't want to be doing this anymore. It doesn't bring us meaning. And that is the thing. So in the battle between work and life, we're not trying to balance them. Life has won. We all are prioritizing our life. And that is the change that is happening. And work is forced to accommodate. And that's what's the interesting moment that we're in, okay? So, and then the last thing, which we've been sort of talking around, we might as well just dig into it for a minute, is that nobody has one job anymore.
No, they do not.
So, I want to talk about this, but you brought this up in the green room, so to speak. So this had a big impact on you. So give me your reaction before I tell you sort of how this all came about.
Okay, yes. I'm really excited that we can get deep into my own psychological issues on this episode. It feels important. But
that's why we're here.
I know, I love it, right? Yes, that's why I'm hosting. What I loved, so you talk about job, side jobs, and the ghost jobs. And the ghost job really stood out to me. But what's funny is I work as an elementary librarian. And for a long time, I talked about that as not a full-time job because it's only 30 hours a week. But really, that is my main job.
Yes.
And then the idea, though, that I have side jobs. I do podcasting. I wrote a book. I write sometimes in other ways. I'm working on a novel. Those are all little side jobs. But the ghost job, and I even wrote this down, ghost jobs being kind of the mental load, but also not just specific to that. I thought creatives, all of us have a ghost job, which is, pretty much just relentless self-doubt and how much time in a day you're going to go just assign to that, right? I'm amazed. So reading that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's something I never thought of, but you're exactly right. So yes, so
thank you for sharing that. And we're going to get deeper in the psychology here. Yes. We're not going to get away with just that top line. We're going to get into it in a minute here, but let me talk about what the idea that you have a job that you go to and then you come back to your family or your personal life, like that is an idea that does not reflect how we live today. So no one has one job anymore. In fact, I got out a defining book of my childhood, which is, what do people do all day? In fact, actually, for a long time, this book, which is now called The Search, was called, well, what do people do all day? And, that's like, it's got the raccoon who's a baker, right? And it's got the, squirrel that's a carpenter, by the way, and they're all traditionally gendered and, they do the same thing. So that's not the world that we live in anymore.
No.
So it turns out we have up to side jobs. We'll start with a main job. And I love that you said that your main job wasn't necessarily a full-time job, right? And by the way, interestingly enough, fewer than half of us even have a main job anymore. And a main job could be the primary source of time, or it could be the primary source of money and benefits, right? There are different reasons, okay? Yes. Then we have a care job. 2/3 of us have a care job, like caring for children or aging relatives, or some of us both.
Yes.
I'm older than you are. 3/4 of us have a side job. I sort of feel like that's been in the culture a lot, but there were two kinds of jobs I'd never heard before. One is something that people do hoping that it leads to something else, right?
Yes.
So that I called a hope job, right? And so that is selling Etsy, selling jewelry on Etsy, right? Or writing a screenplay, right? Or something that you do. Maybe for you, it's, I don't know if you've sold your novel, but like maybe that's a hope job.
Yep. The novel is a hope job. The memoir was sold. So now that's a side job.
So that would be a side job, right? And these are both distinctions that don't matter, but also really do matter, right?
Yes.
Because what's interesting is often the difference between a side job and a hope job is the side job will bring in money. But the hope job, we're often paying out of pocket for, right?
Yes.
So you have to, like, if you're selling pickles at the farmer's market, you've got to invest in the crock. I'm thinking this because I want to make pickles this summer when I become an empty nester. But like, you need the pickles and the brine but I kept hearing about this thing, which I have to say is not in the literature of work to my knowledge. I haven't ChatGPT checked that because I've never been on ChatGPT, but it's that people have an invisible time suck. Here's the key thing, that feels like a job. Battling self-doubt, imposter syndrome, battling discriminations or microaggressions, right? Battling mental health or sobriety, right? Or I think you just put it beautifully, self-doubt. Another huge one, financial wellness. Like, I didn't grow up with money skills. And so therefore I don't know how much do I save and how do I invest? That was fascinating. It kept coming up. Like I talked to a woman who works at Vox, and, she's a creative. As you said, she's in the kind of the beginning of her career, but she knows her parents have some issues and she knows that she's going to have to take care of her parents. She can't rely on them. She has a side job to bring in extra money and has this goat job of like going around on Zillow looking for real estate so she can move out of the city and get a home big enough like to live with her parents who are going to need her to take care of them. Like, that is a huge time suck. So this sounds like a burden. And I know for moms who don't have time, they don't have time. But I actually think the more helpful way to look at it is that what's non-negotiable is we want meaning from what we do. Mm-hmm. So maybe in this fluid world we live in, maybe you do the main job or the side job for money and salary, but you do the hope job for meaning, right? Or maybe you say, you know what? I just got a great offer for a promotion, but my kid's on travel soccer this year and I just don't have time. So I'm going to focus on that for a while. Because here's the blessing of the nonlinear life. When I was growing up, and even when we had children 18 years ago, the perception was if you got off the path, you could never get back on the path. So you have no career, you have no job, but you also have no path. And when there is no path, you can get on or off as many times as you want. And that's the thing. The blessing of the moment that we're in is that you can find this mix to find meaning, but also there is no, sort of a career-ending moment of taking time off to be with your children because there's no career anymore. So you can get back doing work when that time is ripe again.
I love the way that this book frames it and that you're framing it right now, because there's such a hopeful posture here where it's okay to kind of cobble the things together to make it fit for you, to make meaning. And it really does give an opportunity to validate all of these jobs instead of seeing them as weights we carry. It's okay, so this is where my energy goes and this is where I take in a little bit more energy and just these ideas that I can really put down. And I think the ghost job, part of the reason it was so helpful to me is that we think about the stories we tell ourselves. And that's another big theme of your book is just the stories that we tell ourselves. So I'm taking a moment to not only evaluate those and see if they're actually correct. I'm fact checking the story I tell myself, but also to ask, is this a story that I want to spend time telling myself? Because so many of those.
So that, I think, is exactly where this leads us, right? So I think that the first half of the search, it wasn't my goal. It was my goal is to sort of capture what's going on. But the number one thing I'm hearing from readers is that it is validating. And also it's sort of what both Life is and the Transitions and the Search have both done is, I don't know, the technical term for the reaction. You're a librarian. Maybe you know this reaction, but I think it's a technical reaction. People say, like, you're putting words to these feelings that I had that I didn't know what to do with.
Yes.
That I'm in a life transition, right? Or I'm in a work transition, or I'm unhappy. Like, so it's kind of simple-minded. I've been, joking that it's a technical term, but like people feel validated that they now have a framework to understand what they're going for. And what this all leads to, though, is the task of kind of updating your story. And so, because I think that I would say the sort of number one thing I learned is, if you go back to your in-laws, right, that you're talking about your husband, and is that the story we've been telling in this country for 200 years has been all about up,
yes,
right? Rags to riches, up by your bootstraps, higher floor, bigger office, greater salary, more benefits. But if there's one thing I learned of talking to hundreds of people, 1,500 hours of interviews, is that the people who are happiest and most fulfilled in what they do, they don't just climb, they also dig. And they perform what I call kind of personal archaeology, right? They perform a meaning audit in which they explore what is it that gives them meaning right now. And so what the whole 21 questions to find work that you love is all about is using the basic building blocks of storytelling, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. The mistake that most people make is they start with how. They're like, okay, I need new work. Like, how do you brush up my resume, like clean up my LinkedIn profile, right? Call my friends close and far. Well, you know what the problem with that is? It will work and you actually will get a job, but in 2.5 years, you'll be unhappy and doing it again. So the first thing to do is to try to figure out who are you right now? And that begins by going back and saying, what did I learn from my parents? Like what imprint, when I ask people, I'll pull these numbers up. You can hear my clicking in the microphone here. But if I look, it's on page 164 of the search. Question, what were the upsides of work you learned from your parents and the downsides? Give me a quick answer. So what were the upsides you learned from your parents and what were the downsides?
Upsides are, financial, obviously, you make money and you have, I think my dad was in hospitality, so definitely a service element that you're of use and present and attentive. And
so what were the downsides you learned from watching them?
Downsides were it's easy to overwork. I think I learned to overwork a little bit from them. And then also work-life balance, poor work-life balance.
So this is interesting. I told you we were going to get deeper here.
Yeah.
Number one upside, hard work, right? The value of hard work.
Yes.
Okay. That's like 2/3 of us. And the rest were like, love what you do or be true to yourself. But when you look at downsides, they're much more tightly clumped. And number one, overwork. And then number two, the strain on the family. Like, my parents worked very hard. And this is a difference, right? So we're in a generation. I'm almost prepared to say anybody listening to this conversation self-identifies as a mom. Like that's important to them, but yet they want ideas, right? So what is moms don't have time, to read? It's all about, I want to be part of the world, but I'm being a mom is important to me. So one of the ways that we define meaning is that we're not prepared.
Yes.
To work by the old metric of only money is the way you're going to gauge it. If it means traveling 3 times, 3 weeks a month. I talked to a mom who was, had a great job in Chicago and was traveling 2 weeks a month. And she was like, that's not what I want to be. I want to be home with my family more. And so she, again, changed her job, something that more suited to what she was now. And by the way, over the years, she ended up getting 2 masters and now started her own company. But again, here's the oscillation of the nonlinear work life. So there's a question, right? So right away, we're only one question into the 21 questions. And what we've established is you have all of these, almost like ghosts, you have all of these things that are bouncing around in your head. This is why I call it our work scripture, right?
Yes.
Because it's like homilies and parables and lessons and stories and narrative that are clouding our choices, but we're not aware of it. And so part of what I'm trying to do in the search is like put them out onto the kitchen table so you can have them. So let me just ask you one more question, right?
Yeah.
So other than family, who were your role models as a child growing up?
Probably my teachers. And I wanted to be a doctor. So doctors.
Okay. And so here's what's interesting about this, right?
Yeah.
So in the who, what, when, where, why, and how, what were the upsides and downsides of work you learned from your parents? That's a who question, because you inherit that. That's just in your whoville are your parents, right?
Yes.
They are in the ecosystem, right? But when you start saying, what role models did you admire and what did you admire about them? That's a what question, because that's the first time when we're children that we make affirmative actions about whom we choose to relate to. Okay. What do we know about you? We know that you spend time in a school. You're an elementary school librarian, right?
Yes.
So this is a thing. And if I'd asked you, which I probably should have, like what you admired about your teachers, well, I'll just ask you, what did you admire about your teachers?
It's their engagement and who they were as people. I mean, I wrote about it at one point. One of my teachers, she just was settled in her own self. And I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but I just wanted to be like her. She was wise, she was kind, she was engaged.
So what are you doing in your life, right?
Yeah.
You're engaged. Okay, you like ideas, right?
Yes.
So you both spend time with children, but you're podcasting and you're meeting new people, right? You are a conduit between people and ideas. Like before we're told money matters most of all, right? Or your title matters, or dress for the job you want, not the job you have. That is imprinted on. That's the script that the culture gives us. But we all have this scripture before we have that. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then what you do, so each of these the questions are about the past. Who are your role models? Like what pain point did you want to solve when you were growing up? And so what was your toothache? These are the questions that are the past. And then what we work toward in these 21 questions to find work you love is a question I'll ask you right now. So you mentioned that you've got all these different side jobs and hope jobs, this like work 360, I call it. But answer this question for me, right? Like, so my purpose right now is blank.
Connection. To be connected.
So first of all, we are having this conversation not in the same room. We are connected in having this conversation. If I just then echo what I have heard, what's the first thing you said? I sat down with my husband. I connected with him over that. He has these connections with the people in his life that are imprinting his expectation of work. I'm connected to my students, but I'm also now connected to myself. Not only am I writing a nonfiction book, but I'm also writing a memoir, which is connected to my creativity. So what's insanely powerful about this, I interviewed a guy named Mark Savickas, who is like the dean of this kind of thinking of it's called narrative career construction, right? Constructing the story of who we want to be. And he said to me, when I meet somebody, I know within 5 minutes what the answer should be and what they should be doing, but I don't want to tell them because I want them to discover it inside yourself. And that is what I've been trying to do here, is to give, the one thing I learned, there are 3 lies, the one truth is only you can write your own story. And the blessing of the world we live in today is, and this is, I have to say, disproportionately true for women than for men, is you don't have to chase someone else's dream. You don't have to do it. The one thing I tell to my 18-year-old twin daughters is, don't do what you think I want you to do. Because you'll be unhappy and you'll be doing something else in 10 years. And by the way, doing something else in 10 years is fine. But the job is for you to figure out what you want to do. You don't have to chase someone else's dream anymore. You can chase your own dream. And what I've tried to put down on the page is a set of tools to help you identify what is your dream, because it changes. And then maybe the blessing, as you said, is to use those questions and help someone else that you love find their dream too.
Bruce, thank you for this time. I am moved. This has really been a beautiful conversation. And I hope that everyone picks up your book. And I think the important thing for everyone to remember is that this book really is for everyone. I think no matter what you think your job, finding meaningful work is something that we are all doing, whether you're employed or not. And so I love what you've done here, and I'm so grateful for this time. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you again to Zibby for all you're building. And yeah, I think of this book in some ways as like the greatest informational interview to meet these people. And if you come on this journey, I think you will be inspired to find the work you love, the meaning you crave, and the happiness you deserve.
I love it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.